Night in Lumiere has a shape. It hangs above the rooftops like a second sky, an awareness with teeth. Because everyone in the city grows up under the same shadow. The Paintress presence. Constant and suffocating, watching from beyond the water and the distance. Gustave grew up with that pressure pressing inward every day of his life. And in Clair Obscur Expedition 33, that pressure isn't metaphor. It's a calendar, a ritual, a sentence that counts down in public. Each year, the Paintress paints a number on a colossal monolith. When that number changes, everyone whose age matches the number, by the game's telling equal or above, vanishes in an event the people call the Gomach, erased from the world. So Gustave's story begins where most stories would end. On the day the world proves again that it will not bargain. He watches someone he loves disappear. On the day of the Gomach, Gustave says goodbye to Sophie, his former lover, aged 33, before the ritual takes her. And with only 1 year left to live, he joins expedition. That is the first thing to understand about Gustave. He doesn't set out on an adventure. He volunteers for a suicide mission because doing nothing is also death, just slower, quieter, and more cowardly. The official character Baye frames Gustave as an engineer first. He dedicated his life to Lumiere's defense and agricultural systems, protecting the city, keeping it fed, keeping it standing. That matters because it tells you what kind of man he is, before the expedition strips him down to survival. Gustave isn't introduced as a chosen hero, a noble lineage, or a myth in human form. He is introduced as someone practical, someone who tried to build bulwarks against the inevitable, someone who kept working while the sky counted down. And yet he still felt suffocated, not merely threatened. That word suggests something personal. Not only fear of death, but claustrophobia of living in a world where every life is pre-labeled with an expiration date. So when he becomes an expeditioner, he is not chasing glory. He devotes his final year to defeating the Paintress and reclaiming a future for Lumiere children. A future he likely won't live to see. That is the second thing to understand. Gustave's core drive is a legacy, a stubborn refusal to let the countdown be the only story Lumiere tells about itself. In the main cast around Gustave, that motivation most directly applies to Maëlle, Gustave's adopted foster sister in many summaries. Maëlle is only 16, significantly younger than the other expeditioners. She is orphaned at age 3 and never felt at home at Lumiere. She struggles to connect with people, but came to appreciate Gustave. And unlike the older volunteers, the official character Paige gives Maëlle a different, sharper reason. She sees the expedition as her chance to explore the world beyond Lumiere, and finally forge her own destiny. That single detail turns the expedition from a purely desperate act into something else, a collision of motives. For some, the mission is the last stand against extinction. For Maëlle, it's also an escape from a life that never felt like hers. And Gustave stands in the middle of that collision, protector, anchor, and, in sense, the person Maëlle can trust enough to leave the city with. The expedition makes landfall, and the story doesn't reward hope with time. Multiple summaries describe the catastrophe. Most of Expedition 33 is slaughtered soon after arriving on the continent. The survivors scatter. Gustave finds Lunes, Sayel, and Maëlle. And then the game does something cruel on purpose. A major twist hits in the end of the Act 1. Gustave is suddenly killed in front of Maëlle. The developers explicitly framed this as a way to make the player feel the same grief the characters live with. Pain as a structure, not decoration. The creative team embraced the idea of killing the apparent main character because the game's themes are built on loss, and they wanted the loss to land both emotionally and mechanically. And there is one line that keeps being cited around Gustave's final moment, his last words. For those who came after, right? That is Gustave's thesis in one sentence. Not for me, not for victory, for the next set of footsteps, even if his own are cut off mid-stride. If we think about Gustave as a person, we can say that his strengths are next, his protective responsibility, built over a lifetime. The official Baye ties his identity to defending Lumiere through engineering, defense systems, and agriculture. That is long-haul responsibility, not momentary heroism. Willingness to sacrifice his remaining life for others. He joins Expedition 33 with 1 year left, aiming to reclaim a future for Lumiere's children. That is not framed as self-preservation. It's framed as giving away his last year for something that outlives him. He has a legacy-minded worldview in a world that is actually designed to erase legacies. The quoted last words crystallize this. He measures meaning by what comes after him. Like every human, Gustave has its own weaknesses. The weight of the world presses him toward despair. He can't invent internal monologues, but we can say the game's premise and the writing around him position him inside constant grief, starting with the Sophie death at the Gloom Age. And the official bias suffocated phrasing suggests his psyche is shaped by that ongoing pressure. He carries a kind of duty that can become tunnel vision. That same dedication can read as limitation, because in a world like this, devotion often means you don't allow yourself room to be anything else. And then, narratively, his biggest weakness is structural. He is mortal in a story that weaponizes mortality. The developers openly design a twist to make mortality hurt by taking him away when the player was invested into him. Gustave is not only a story protagonist, he is also your first mechanical language for how Expedition 33 wants you to fight. Regarding the game mechanics, Gustave teaches the game's hybrid rhythm, turn-based decisions with real-life execution. Many guides and reviews describe Gustave at the entry point, your early anchor for learning systems that combine planning with timing. He has an overcharge as a defining power strike. Gustave's unique mechanic revolves around filling and spending overcharge for big impact. He also has a break mechanics that calls out Gustave's overcharge specifically as a tool used to trigger break once a bar is primed, turning boss fights into a window of amplified damage and interrupted enemy actions. In plain terms, Gustave's excels when fight lasts long enough for setup to matter. When you can build momentum, then cash it in. But along the strong points, Gustave has its own weaknesses in combat. He has a huge resource and timing dependence. If overcharge is his identity, then inconsistency is his vulnerability. You should play around filling the meter quickly, implying that when you can't feed that engine or mistime it, his sailing drops. The break system often matters most in longer encounters, especially bosses, because smaller enemies may die before break becomes irrelevant. So one of Gustave's standout contributions, overcharging to break, shines brightest where the game is already at its hardest and can feel like overkill elsewhere. There is also one more weak point. Narrative removal becomes mechanical removal. This is not a balanced weakness, but it is a player facing reality. The end of Act 1 twist takes Gustave away after you've invested into his toolkit. The creators explicitly intended that loss to register emotionally and mechanically. In other words, Gustave's gameplay weakness is the same as his story weakness. The world doesn't promise he will be there tomorrow. In a city built around an annual erasure, Gustave is defined by what cannot be erased, what he tries to leave behind. He is Lumiere's craft and labor, defensive system harvests the unglamorous work of keeping people alive one more year. He is a private grief of the Gloom Age made public, starting with Sophie. He is the expedition's mission statement spoken like a prayer for strangers, for those who come after. And he is also the game's warning, delivered early and without mercy. This story will not protect you from loss. It will make you walk through it, step by step, until you understand why Lumiere keeps sending expeditions that almost never came home. Not because they expect to win, because surrender would be the final erasure. Thanks for watching, hit that like button, subscribe for more expedition lore, and be strong through your own journey to the Paintress core.